How many eligible voters can you squeeze out of our democratic process and be okay with it? I believe that answer should be zero.
Today, when I was going to get lunch, I saw a sign that said, that Ann Richards had said, life is not fair, but government should be. And that's true.
Lawmakers will be sending a message that you can be on the front lines of our economy, that you can be risking your lives at times like so many have done during the pandemic, but yet you shouldn't be able to cast your vote. That's not right.
A few of the pleas from some Texas voters over the weekend, but shortly after, Texas House and Senate committees advanced two bills which opponents say could disenfranchise millions of voters in the state. Meanwhile, in Washington, one of President Biden's closest allies is pushing for him to endorse a reform to the Senate filibuster. Speaking to Politico, Majority Whip Jim Clyburn said Biden should back a change to the filibuster that would exempt legislation that applies to the Constitution. The change would make it possible for Democrats to pass their sweeping election reform bill and another bill reauthorizing key sections of the 1965 Voting Rights Act with just Democratic support. Congressman Clyburn said the president should pressure Senator Joe Manchin, one of the staunchest supporters of the filibuster in the Democratic caucus. In response, the White House echoed its call for a return to so-called talking filibuster, which would require senators to stay on the Senate floor to block a bill. Clyburn told Politico he met with Manchin while the senator was crafting a compromise voting bill. Clyburn told him, quote, "I'm not asking you to eliminate the filibuster, but what I'm saying to you is that nobody ought to have the right to filibuster my constitutional rights." Joining us now, former U.S. Secretary of Housing and Urban Development under President Obama and former San Antonio Mayor Julian Castro, who this morning is adding another title to his resume, that of MSNBC political analyst. So welcome. Good to have you this morning.
Thanks so much for being with us. Why don't we start by just following up on Jim Clyburn's suggestion? And I've said time and again that if Mitch McConnell made an exception for the filibuster for what many people certainly conservatives consider to be the most important thing Congress does, which is to vote on the nomination of Supreme Court justices, then why in the world can you not also make an exception to voting rights? And as Jim said, to rights involving the Constitution?
Yeah, I think that Representative Clyburn is exactly right. I mean, and as you point out, Republicans have put a carve-out in effect for the filibuster for the two things that they always want, which is getting to appoint judges as quickly as possible and also tax cuts. And Representative Clyburn now pleading with the president, whom, of course, as everybody knows, Clyburn made the biggest difference in President Biden's campaign, pleading with him to at least push a carve-out on voting rights, and also with Joe Manchin. My hope is that in the least, this is something that's going to get done. We know that there's significant pushback to actually doing away with the filibuster. I think that would actually be best because it's not only a problem when we talk about voting rights, but a number of other issues that I think would be good for the American people if Congress could actually get some things done. But a carve-out or a push on the talking filibuster, as the president has already said he supports. The problem is that we really haven't seen any activity. We haven't seen any push from the Oval Office on this issue. And you can see that, that the impatience is growing among Democrats.
I wanted to ask you about that, Jonathan Lemire at the White House. What is the timing of President Biden having that discussion with Joe Manchin, or Joe Manchin's timing, from what you've heard, about making these changes? He talked about making the talking filibuster. We've heard discussions about moving the number from 60 to 55. There is, again, the carve-out, which, if Harry Reid did that carve-out for district court judges, and circuit judges. Mitch McConnell and the Republicans did that carve out for Supreme Court judges, which, again, the most critical issue to their base. So when is Joe Biden going to sit down with Joe Manchin again? And when should we expect some sort of movement on the filibuster and a movement towards getting a bill, some version of H.R. 1 that can actually pass, some version of H.R. 4 that can actually pass?
Well, first of all, the president and Senator Manchin talk all the time. They speak on the phone frequently. President Biden is often on the phone from the Oval Office or the White House residence, calling around to senators, and Manchin's near the top of his list. He has also implored other people to lobby Manchin on his behalf, including civil rights leaders like Reverend Sharpton, who have spoken to Manchin, have met with him now more than once to talk about the importance of this issue. The timetable remains a little fuzzy. There's a sense that it'll be sometime this summer. Right now, the infrastructure bill is paramount. We have the Senate is back in session as of today after a bit of a recess. There's a lot on their plate the next few weeks. That seems to be the top priority. But there is a growing impatience, as Secretary Castro said, on voting rights and the filibuster. We are finally going to hear from President Biden. His long-anticipated, somewhat delayed speech on the importance of voting rights is going to be tomorrow. I'll be traveling with him to Philadelphia, to the National Constitution Center, which is where he will deliver it. And that's supposed to be, White House aides tell us, the beginning of the public lobbying campaign. We've also heard from Vice President Harris last week on this. This is in her portfolio. We're going to hear more from them going forward. But and they're also going to be stressing, the administration is, about legal remedies in the Department of Justice and other matters to preserve the vote. But everyone here recognizes they can only be really done with a legislative solution. And that's only going to happen if indeed there is some sort of filibuster reform. But there has been reluctance to do so from Manchin, from Sinema, from others. And I think we are still a few weeks away from knowing what course, if any, will be taken to change things. And if not, Joe, I think it's clear there won't be any meaningful measures taken to protect the right to the ballot.
Mr. Secretary, let's talk about the Texas voting bill that just passed. And we look back at what happened in Georgia. A lot of people came out talking about the Georgia bill being Jim Crow 2.0 in the light of day. You had people like Nate Cohn at the New York Times say, well, not exactly. In many ways, it made voting more accessible. There are obviously some very troubling parts of that bill, but it wasn't quite as bad as first advertised. Let's talk about the Texas voting bill. Do you consider that to be a dangerous piece of legislation? And is there any portion of that legislation, like the Georgia bill, that actually takes the rights away from local election officials and puts it in the hands of the Republican legislature?
Yeah, when you look at what Republicans are trying to do here in Texas, I mean, it's all tied into hundreds of pieces of legislation across the country, whether we're talking about Georgia, we're talking about Arizona, other states. And I see it as trying to push back on a changing Texas. The demographics of Texas have been changing for a while. Everybody knows that. In 2018, Republicans lost 12 state house seats. They lost 2 congressional seats. They lost 2 state Senate seats. And this is an attempt to try and make sure that they stay in power longer. So when places like Harris County, for instance, did some forward-looking things to increase voter participation, 24-hour voting, drive-through voting, now the legislature is saying, no, you can't do that. In addition to that, in the first rendition of this in the Texas regular session, they tried to have a provision put in so that there would be later Sunday voting. Sunday voting wouldn't start until 1 p.m. Folks know that in the African-American church, one of the traditions has been to take voters to the polls right after church services in the morning. That provision is now gone in the special session version of this. Also gone is a provision that
wait. I'm sorry. Let me be clear. Let's be clear. So, are you saying that the souls to the polls provision was taken out? Does it start after 1 p.m. or were they able to restrict the voting on Sundays? What's in the final version?
That's right, Joe. What's on the table now in the special session now, this is still being worked on in the Senate and the House, right? It went through 2 committees this weekend. But The restriction on Sunday voting that would start at 1 p.m. is now gone, and I believe now voting can start at 9 a.m. To address your earlier point, look, are there some things that the legislation does where somebody at first blush might look at it and say, hey, isn't this better? An example of that is that it increases by 1 hour overall early voting hours during the week. So what they do is they say, no, we're actually trying to increase overall early voting hours. But really what they're doing is it's a point shaving system. They're taking away the mechanism for local communities to try and increase participation and doing things like saying to county registrars across the state, you cannot proactively send out mail-in ballots for people to fill out applications for. No more of that. So it's going to make it harder for people who have relied on getting a mail-in ballot application to actually participate in the future. I think it is overstating the case to say that they are absolutely stopping people from voting. What they're engaged in is suppression through a point-shaving system. They know that putting these mechanisms in place, whether it's banning 24-hour voting, banning drive-through voting, stopping mail-in ballot application mail-outs, that's going to help Republicans. It's going to help them stay in power. That is their game.